Hey everyone, sorry it is so dark out here, but it is what it is. I couldn't find my headlamp. So what is a stable coin, and would you ever want one? Well, it's a complex answer, but I'm going to unpack it here. Okay, so Bitcoin is the future monetary system of the world, and it's amazing. But in some developing countries, they want a cryptocurrency because they don't understand Bitcoin yet. They're earlier in their journey. They want a cryptocurrency that is not plummeting like a rock, like their local currency. They're willing to put up with the loss of purchasing power of the US dollar because it's losing 4% a year because their local currency is losing 40% a year. So if you are in a developing country, meaning a country that is poor today and hopefully not tomorrow, if you are in a poor country and you cannot stomach the volatility of Bitcoin, but you need a way to store value for the short term, and your local currency is collapsing, then stablecoins provide you a way of doing that because it is a cryptocurrency that is tied to the stable value of the US dollar. Now, if you are a US citizen, this brings you essentially zero value because you already have a currency tied to the value of the US dollar. It's called the US dollar. So stablecoins are primarily valuable to people who do not have access to the US dollar. So if you are in Nigeria or Turkey or Argentina or Cyprus or Egypt or Malawi or one of the numerous countries that is experiencing, Zimbabwe is another one, is experiencing hyperinflation, meaning the value of your currency is dropping by percents, not every year, but percents per month, or even, hundreds of percents over time. It's crazy. Like the inflation is just, 150% a year. Your purchasing power is dropping like a rock. So if you're in a developing country and you can't handle the volatility of Bitcoin because you have to, pay your employees and you're living hand to mouth and you're, paycheck to paycheck, and literally, a 5% change in the price of the money will destroy your way of life, then stable coins are a way to get access to the US dollar for people who otherwise do not have access to the US dollar. So they can exchange their Nigerian naira or their Venezuelan bolivar or, their Argentinian pesos or whatever it is. They can exchange those for a cryptocurrency that is a stablecoin, which is essentially a cryptocurrency representation of the US dollar. Again, if you are a US citizen, there is essentially no value to you to doing this because you can just sit on US dollars already. If you're a US citizen living in the United States, you already have access to US dollars. Those US dollars are losing value right now at more than 4% per year. People who don't work for the government would argue the inflation rate's probably more like between 9% to 15%. But regardless, even the government tells you that you're losing value 4% per year, which is crazy. So do you need a stablecoin? No. If you are a U.S. citizen living in the United States, you do not need stablecoins because you already have access to the U.S. dollar. The primary benefit of a stablecoin is for developing countries where they do not have access to the US dollar and they are not yet aware of Bitcoin, because all of them are aware of the US dollar. So the adoption of stablecoins has been very fast in developing countries because they're tied to the US dollar and they were already familiar with the US dollar as a better currency than their local currency. Even if it's not a great currency, it's still better than their local currency. So they are already aware of that. And so the adoption of stablecoins typically happens faster than Bitcoin, because for Bitcoin, you have to understand a new kind of money. But for a stablecoin, you don't have to understand a new kind of money. You just have to understand that you are using an electronic version of the US dollar that is in the form of a cryptocurrency. Okay, so who makes stablecoins? There are two primary companies behind stablecoins. One is Tether, Tether, and Tether makes a stablecoin called USDT. That's similar to USD, which is US dollars, except they add a lowercase t on the end of it. So therefore, it's an uppercase USD and then a lowercase t. So that is US dollars tethered. And they use the name Tether because they're sort of tethered to the value of the US dollar. I won't go into exactly how those work, other than the companies that make stablecoins actually are insanely profitable, because what they actually do is they're not actually backed by US dollars, they're backed by US government treasury bonds. And so, which they use short-term treasury bonds so they can always remain liquid. But what that means is the USDT, the stablecoin, trades at a dollar per dollar, but it's actually stored in something that generates interest for the issuer. You do not get interest, but they get interest. And so if you have a balance of USDT in your account that is backed by US government bonds, US government debt, which also backs the US dollar, and then they get the interest rate. Usually they get the interest rate, you do not, which means companies like Tether have made billions and billions and billions of dollars of profit having a stable coin that is supposed to be backed by US dollars, but is actually backed by US government debt, which pays an interest rate. And then they collect that interest rate themselves and they use it to support their stablecoin. Now, does a stablecoin have the benefits of Bitcoin? No, it does not. First of all, it 100% loses value as fast as the US dollar. So there are no benefits to owning a stablecoin as compared to a US dollar because they both lose value just as fast. Also, just like the US government can freeze your funds if you use the US dollars, they can also freeze your funds if you use a stablecoin. So if you have money in USDT, the government can freeze that and can confiscate it just as easily or even more easily than they can take away your actual US dollars at a bank. So, stablecoins do not have any of the benefits of being completely uncensorable, unstoppable, autonomous. There's no way. You just don't have all the benefits of Bitcoin. All you really have is a cryptographic representation of US dollar. But other than that, there's really no benefits. So again, if you're in a developing country and your local currency is collapsing and all you know is the US dollar is better than your currency and you are not up to speed on Bitcoin, I can see where you might bridge that gap with a stable coin. Obviously, it's worse than Bitcoin, but it just, US dollars lose value slowly forever as Bitcoin obviously goes up in value over time, but that can be volatile on the way up. So the US dollar is, very stable, but always going down, which I guess is not stable because you can't say something is stable if it's always dropping in value. But at least the US dollar is consistently dropping 4% to 9% per year, but at least it's predictable. Bitcoin is much less predictable other than the fact that it always ends up in the end. So as long as you're patient, you can benefit by far by investing in Bitcoin. You're never going to make money investing in stablecoins because by definition, they will never be worth more than a US dollar. So, it's impossible for you to make money investing in stablecoins. Therefore, they're not considered an investment. They're considered a emerging market or developing country sort of stand-in for the local currency if the local currency is collapsing. Okay, so the other maker of a stablecoin is Coinbase. The company is actually Circle, C-I-R-C-L-E. Circle has a partnership with Coinbase, and I think actually Coinbase bought them out. I think it's now owned entirely by Coinbase. But anyway, they have a currency, a US dollar stablecoin called USDC, C as in coin. So it's the US dollar coin instead of USDT, which is Tether. It is USDC, which is US dollar coin, and that is done by Circle. So I guess the C could stand for Circle or it could stand for coin, but regardless, it is issued by Circle/Coinbase. Once again, just like USDT, it doesn't have any of the benefits of Bitcoin other than it's digital. And obviously the US dollar is already digital for people who live in the United States. But if you live in a developing country, it's very hard to get your hands on US dollars. And so you're stuck with the local currency, which, very frequently goes to zero. So all of this was sort of brought back into the news headlines because USDT, Tether, the company behind USDT, announced that they were bringing USDT to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. So how does that work? Well, the Bitcoin Lightning Network is an incredible payments layer, meaning it's designed for smaller transactions, that is built on Bitcoin. And previously, most of the people that have used USDC or USDT, Tether, they have used networks like Solana or Ethereum or Tron, which is spelled Tron, or basically a bunch of random smart contract platforms. But they typically have not been using the Bitcoin network because the Bitcoin network was not designed to transport US dollar representations around. It was designed to transport around Bitcoin. Like the Bitcoin network was built for Bitcoin. It was not built for these random US dollar stablecoins. But obviously, if somebody onboards to a stablecoin, they are, one step away from Bitcoin because literally with the push of a button, they can get Bitcoin. So stablecoins are a great way for people to transition from physical money to a digital representation of that physical money. And then it's only one more step to transfer all the way to Bitcoin. So stablecoins are a great way to onboard people in developing countries because they get used to using electronic currency. And it's pretty easy to figure out then that the best electronic currency is Bitcoin. So it's a big deal that Tether is bringing their USDT stablecoin, which is by far the biggest of the two. The USDT stablecoin is much larger, especially internationally, much larger than the USDC stablecoin issued by Coinbase and Circle. So it's a big deal they're bringing it to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. It will be one more way that people are onboarded to cryptocurrency, and it will get them much closer to ultimately buying Bitcoin, which is the future of what everyone will ultimately use. So stablecoins, a good way to think about them is stablecoins are essentially a stepping stone in developing countries to get to Bitcoin if you live in a world where you can't go all the way to Bitcoin immediately because maybe the infrastructure is not quite there yet, or maybe the volatility of Bitcoin, even though it's the upside of Bitcoin is obviously huge, and there is zero upside to stablecoins because they literally cannot increase in value. But it's a step to get there for developing emerging market, meaning poor, trying to be rich countries. So hopefully that helps. It's a big deal that Tether is coming to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. It will make it even easier for people to onboard to Bitcoin via stablecoins. And obviously the more stuff that's being built, good evening, the more stuff that is built on the Bitcoin network, the easier and better all around as compared to people using Solana or Tron or Ethereum or Algorand or a gazillion other random networks to mess around with stablecoins. So I would much rather, if stablecoins are going to be out there, which they are for the time being, as a stopgap for developing countries who are in the process of onboarding to Bitcoin but are not quite there yet, if those are going to exist, then great. I would rather they run on Bitcoin and the Bitcoin Lightning Network as opposed to a bunch of random smart contract chains that will ultimately go to zero. So that's the quick primer. Stablecoins play a valuable role for developing countries on their way to Bitcoin. In the United States, you don't need them because you already have the US dollar, which means you're already just one step away from Bitcoin. And you don't need to go, to electronic payments first or electronic money and then Bitcoin, because the US dollar is already in electronic form on numerous platforms, in the United States already. So hopefully that makes sense. You will never need a stable coin. So this is entirely sort of a FYI in case the topic is interesting. And in case you're curious, why is there news stories about the USDT Tether stablecoin coming to the Bitcoin Lightning Network? The answer is it's a big deal, but is not directly relevant to you. But it will help onboard people from all over the world that are not quite ready for Bitcoin, but they will be. And obviously there's a lot of smart people in those countries that are going straight to Bitcoin, which makes way more sense because Bitcoin doesn't lose value. Stablecoins lose value exactly as fast as whatever currency they're tied to. One other note is Tether actually introduced a bunch of different stablecoins, one tied to the euro, one tied to the Japanese yen, one tied to the Chinese yuan. They have a bunch of stablecoins, but the only one anyone ever really uses is the USDT tied to the US dollar. The reason for that is if you're going to use an electronic currency that is tied to a government money, it makes more sense to use one tied to the US dollar as opposed to the euro. Because as irresponsible as the people in the United States are with their money, the Federal Reserve here, other countries are even worse. So the Eurozone and the European Central Bank is even worse than the U.S. Federal Reserve as far as money printing. So the euro is actually losing value faster than the U.S. dollar. And so when people have a choice between the U.S. dollar and the euro, if it's going to be represented in digital form with with a stable coin, they almost always pick US dollars stable coins as opposed to any other country stable coins. So what that tells you is when people have a choice between a government currency, they almost always pick the US dollar. As soon as they're ready to not have their purchasing power melt away with the US dollar, the only place to go is Bitcoin. And that is the ultimate final destination for all money, is to land at Bitcoin. But if some people need a stepping stone to get there, then good luck with USDT or USDC. It's a great stepping stone on your way to Bitcoin. It gives you the upside of electronic money for the developing world, but it doesn't have all the upside of Bitcoin, which is ultimately where everyone will land in the long term. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks.